Welcome back. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Inside Exec. Jamie sent me a link to a video from a fellow who was talking about the introduction of AI into larger organisations, and I looked at it and it was quite an eye-opener for me in terms of this fellow talking about how AI affects large organisations, and it particularly in terms of knowledge management. And it made me think about when Fulyana and I talked about knowledge management back in 2016. So I went back to that episode, read the transcript, and then thought it's probably time for a bit of an update on that particular one. Now, Jamie unfortunately can't join us today, so I'm going to talk about some topics that relate to knowledge management in the age of AI. But what we are going to do is organise to see if we can have the fellow that was in the video, and his name's Nate Jones, and we're going to see if we can organise to talk to him, because he was very, very knowledgeable, not just on the AI side of things, but in terms of organisational requirements. And I think that you would all find that very interesting in terms of where you are in your organisations and how you can take on AI and what it's going to mean to the people that you choose, you select, and the people who are already in the organisations who have knowledge. And this was particularly around knowledge management and knowledge transfer. So if we look now at what knowledge is, the first point that we need to acknowledge is that traditionally knowledge was something that we collected and we stored in organisations, and now knowledge can be generated instantly using AI tools and large language models. So it becomes a point where it is generated on demand. So knowledge management is no longer about building a repository as it was in 2016. It's about building an organisation that can generate, interpret and apply knowledge in real time. So some of the examples of that is that you might have an AI summarising a customer's history instantly before a meeting, so that you've got that information on hand. You're not relying on someone remembering what they talked about last time, or looking at reams of notes of how often they've dealt with that customer in the past. You can get a nice quick summary with dot points straight out of AI. AI might generate project briefs from scattered internal documents. So you might have repositories of all sorts of information, and AI can bring that together in one document for you. It can identify patterns that humans might miss. So we might, for example, in some of the other businesses that Jamie has, I know that he has looked at buying patterns of a certain demographic for a product that he sells, and it was not something that he expected to see. The buying pattern in terms of times of the year that particular product is bought was not what he had a sense for. So it wasn't just that he missed the pattern, it was that there was a different pattern to what he was thinking was the pattern. So the implication for us as executives is that knowledge management is shifting from storage systems to intelligence systems. And it's still a systems thing, but we have to look at not just where we are storing things, but how we are storing things and how we are maintaining that intelligence system over time. So the second point that came out of the research that I was doing is that organisational knowledge is no longer confined within organisational boundaries. So previously, knowledge management was focused on our internal databases, on CRM systems, on staff experience, on staff knowledge, and it was about managing that knowledge that had built up over years, decades, whatever it was, within an organisation, and managing that knowledge because that was your edge in terms of your customer base, in terms of the services that you provided, of the products that you developed. But now AI allows organisations to access global knowledge, industry patterns on a much more immediate basis than has been in the past, competitive behaviours, sort of indirectly, but certainly that's coming in more to the fore, and best practices derived from millions of external data points, things that you couldn't get hold of before, that you can now access with reasonable ease. So the competitive advantage is no longer who knows the most internally, but who can access and apply the right knowledge the fastest. And this changes the question from what do we know in terms of our knowledge management to how effectively can we access and apply knowledge in a general sense, knowledge that is available to us that we didn't have before. Certainly, organisations can maintain that within the organisation if that's a decision that they make. And this is one of the things we want to talk to Nate about, is how do you decide what you allow out into the general knowledge base and what you keep internally in your organisation. The third point is human knowledge is shifting from possession to interpretation. So previously, experienced individuals were valuable because they held knowledge in their heads. And what we risked was that knowledge loss when those individuals left an organisation, and we had to manage that knowledge transfer, is what we talked about in 2016. AI has changed that dynamic because now we can replicate procedural knowledge. We can provide guidance instantly through AI, and it can suggest actions based on patterns that we might not necessarily have seen in the past. However, what remains uniquely human in this process is the judgment that we can bring to bear, the context that we can bring to bear, the ethics that we have as an organisation, as individuals, and strategic interpretation, which still relies on a whole lot of other knowledge that we bring to bear in that environment. So the value of senior executives is shifting from being the holders of knowledge to being the interpreters of knowledge. And that's a good step, and it's a step that we need to take into account when we're looking at recruiting at that senior executive level as well. The fourth point is that the speed of knowledge flow is now more critical than the volume of knowledge. So previously the focus was on ensuring knowledge was captured and shared properly. Now the risk is not lack of knowledge, but slow access to knowledge. In the original podcast, we talked about the car hire place that had knowledge but couldn't apply it at the right time. And that was my experience with a local car hire company that couldn't apply the right information for me as a customer when I was at the desk waiting for the hire car. But with AI, knowledge has to be available instantly, and systems have to deliver insight at that point of decision. What it means for us as executives in an organisation is that knowledge delayed is now knowledge wasted. So we need to have those systems in place, once again, that help us with that instant information and insight at the point of decision. So the fifth point, the role of knowledge management is shifting from storage to enablement. So this relates back to the previous point as well. So in our traditional model, we stored knowledge, we organised knowledge, we protected knowledge. These days, we have to enable people to be able to access the knowledge instantly. We need to enable AI to use organisational knowledge safely. We need to enable better decisions at every level. So the purpose of knowledge management is no longer to build a library, it's to build an organisation that thinks. So we're not relying on the knowledge as the decision-making factor, we're relying much more on the interpretation of that knowledge, gathering as much knowledge as we can that is relevant to that particular decision and making the decision, making it immediate. The sixth point, AI makes organisational knowledge usable by everyone, not just experts. Previously, knowledge systems required expertise to interpret them or to understand what the knowledge was that was being transferred. AI now allows junior staff to access expert-level insights. There's faster onboarding of staffing. There's reduced reliance on specific individuals. And the implication of that for organisations is that they become less dependent on individual knowledge holders. And we talked about that being very detrimental to organisations and a stumbling block often for decisions when knowledge holders became knowledge hoarders. We talked about that in terms of knowledge transfer and how that you make that happen. But these days, AI democratises knowledge inside organisations, so it flattens the hierarchy and accelerates decision making. Number 7, the greatest risk is no longer losing knowledge, it's trusting the wrong knowledge. So previously the biggest concern was about knowledge loss and that block of knowledge transfer. Now the new risks, and these exist, is that AI might give you incorrect but plausible answers to your questions. We might have outdated internal knowledge being used automatically, and there might be an over-reliance on AI outputs without human judgment. So the executive responsibility has shifted once again from protecting knowledge to governing knowledge, and this is where we want to talk tonight about how we do that and how we choose the right individuals to be able to do that. What you need to ensure within organisation is that you are training your AI on accurate internal data. And Jim Stevenson, who we had talked to us about 12 months ago now, was very much in favour of this, and he talked about a number of examples of where AI, even at that stage, had been trained on inaccurate data, and so which was internal data, and so it was undermining the systems that these places had put in place that were supposed to help them and fast track them and move them forward. And I'll put a link to that particular podcast as well, because it is still relevant today, and we will have Jim back on to talk about what's changed in the 12 months since we talked to him last. The other area that we as executives need to look at is that we need to know that our staff understand when to trust AI and when not to. And that's a big area of discussion, and we need to talk to Jamie about that because he uses it constantly, and I know he is very careful about when he trusts it and when he doesn't, and we're interested in how he makes that call between those two areas of information. So number 8 is competitive advantage is shifting from knowledge ownership to knowledge integration, and not something that we have discussed before. So previously advantages came from having more information as an organisation and as individuals. Now the advantage comes from integrating human insight and organisational knowledge and AI capacity. So what it means is that organisations that win will not be those with the most knowledge, but those that combine human and artificial intelligence most effectively. And that's a really key point that we want to continue to discuss going forward this year, is about that integration, because the speed of what is happening in terms of AI being available and being promoted and being pushed into organisations is that we need to understand how that integration is going to happen, and that there needs to still be that human intelligence involved in the process. So number 9, the role of executives in knowledge management has fundamentally changed. Previously, executives ensured that systems for knowledge management existed. Now, you need to be building organisations that are AI enabled, knowledge sharing by default, and continuously learning. So what we have to manage as executive is knowledge governance, AI governance, and decision governance. So it's much more about that integration than it would have been even 5 years ago. And the last point that I want to make is that knowledge is becoming a living asset, not a stored asset. So previously knowledge was static once it was recorded. Now knowledge evolves continuously because AI is learning continuously. We've got continuous data analysis, and we've got feedback loops happening that are far more accessible than they have ever been before. So knowledge is no longer something we store. It is something that we continuously create and refer to all of the time through our decision-making process. 10 years ago, knowledge management was about making sure people knew what the organisation knew. Today, it's about making sure that the organisation can think faster, learn faster, act faster than its competitors. AI hasn't removed the need for knowledge management. It has made it the central responsibility of leadership. In 2016, knowledge was a resource. Now in 2026, knowledge is a capability. I'll leave you to ponder all of that. I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Inside Exec.